All right, everybody. Caroline Soro and Michael Swain here with Kansas 247. We're here in the booth to break down Kansas's loss to Texas 55-14. Obviously not the outcome that they were looking for, especially late in the season, coming off some momentum from OSU, lost last weekend, but, that's neither here or there. Michael, what are some of your initial thoughts from this game?
Uncharacteristic. I think it's pretty fair to say. I think this year KU's been able to hang its hat on being a competitive football team, and I don't think that was the case. For me, the thing that maybe is resonating with me the most is listening to Lance Leipold talk post-game. He's been very forward, I think, in some of the post-games, talking about, hey, I'm really proud of our team's effort, really proud of the way we fought. There was not that comment from him, and I think that's probably what stood out to me the most. He's big on giving players credit when he feels like they deserve it, and he had a comment basically saying that for some of the team, there were tears in their eyes because they want to compete so bad, but it wasn't like that for every player. And I think that, to me, is, I don't know if concerning is the right word, but maybe what stands out most, because for so much of the season, the team has fought, and I think that the effort level dipped a little bit, and that's just been so uncharacteristic, and I just think that's something that the coaches and players alike are going to have to correct.
Right, and I think that's something that we've witnessed this season from this team is that when they get behind, they've found a way to claw back in, regardless of, I know that there's a running joke saying that the game doesn't start for KU until they're down 14-0. That's kind of, been a theme all season long, that when they get down in games like that, defense makes a couple stops, offense starts rolling, things start coming together, but that is not something that we saw today. I mean, 31-0 at the end of the first half, that, like you said, is uncharacteristic of this team, and it just felt like the playing field was never level as the game went on. I mean, the momentum wasn't there. I don't know if it was because it was cold outside, maybe. It was probably one of the coldest games that they've played all year long. So, I mean, that probably sucked a little bit of the life out of the team here, too. The fans started leaving after halftime. So it just seemed that the energy level as a whole from the stadium, from the team, everything was a little bit off to me, I thought.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's hard to blame fans at the same time that, hey, you're watching your team get kicked at 31-0, and it wasn't close. And I think in games this season, when teams have been able to run the ball against Kansas, it really does spiral from there, and I think that was the case. But I think just the effort level as a whole wasn't there, and again, it's something that coaches are going to have to correct. I guess from your perspective, like what did you think was, I don't know about the most concerning part, but what stood out to you most about the game or post-game?
I think from the game, one of the things that stood out the most to me was just, like I said, kind of that lack of momentum. It was just like, there's a couple great offensive plays, cool, couple completions, okay, 3 and out. Okay, a couple completions. You get down the field, then you have, that awesome what could have been touchdown. Jalen Daniels scrambling, rolling out to his left to Jared Casey. Jared Casey gets in, dives, knocks the pylon down. You think everything's going well. Then they call it back because there's an ineligible man downfield. Then Borchella comes out. It's like, okay, let's, go ahead and try the field goal attempt, at least get some type of points on the board to show for ourselves for the effort. Absolutely nothing. Nada doesn't hit it, and then you're still back at square one, and it's still 17-0. So I mean, it's just kind of like, it was almost like, here we go. We're working down the field. We're getting some momentum. We're building it up, and then we take 5 steps backward because we can't get there. So it's just kind of like, I think from the momentum standpoint, it never was quite established. And you mentioned the run game. It doesn't help when Bijan Robinson is running all over you, 243 yards on the ground. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he's good. And I think that's a really good point, right? I think about that moment in the game, 17-0. If that touchdown counts, and I think I saw some screenshots on Twitter that maybe the ineligible man downfield call was a little bit iffy, depending on where you're looking at it. All of a sudden, you're looking at that being a 17-7 game, and sure, maybe Texas goes and drives the field and is able to score to make it.
But at least you have some points on the board,
exactly,
right?
You have momentum and you have something to show for it. And to go back to something that Leipold said is that was deflating. And I think that is kind of the watershed moment, if you will, of when I think the game kind of was like, okay, this is kind of over now. And I think that Leipold bringing it up post-game, I think, shows that he acknowledged that was kind of the time. And, hey, I mean, Borchella didn't come out to kick for the rest of the game, and I think that's going to be a question now this week is what does that look like? He's, I think, 7 for 13 on the season now, field goal wise.
Multiple in a row, right? Leipold mentioned that post game too. Yeah,
it's bad, and that's going to be have to address somehow this offseason. Obviously, Grant Glasgow's a local kid that is a freshman this year. Maybe there's a competition over the offseason, but that's something that has to change. But I just think that it's a really good point by you to mention the momentum shift, because those are the moments in games that Kansas has had success in, and they just didn't today.
And they just weren't able to convert. And then it's, you move on from that what could have been touchdown, I guess that we're calling it, and then, Jalen Daniels throws an interception. And not that, that was a bad mark on the way he played this game. He had a, pretty good game. It looks like he was 17 to 26 on his passes, so not a bad showing from him at all. But then it's like you have that interception. Next thing you know, Texas gets set up, they come down, they score a touchdown right in the final seconds of the half. It's just an extra added slap in the face. And then, you go back to the locker room, what are you supposed to do with that? You're down 31 to nothing, and it's hard to bounce back from that when it's cold, the fans aren't there, the external factors that are going into it as well. Like you said, Leipold said some guys on the sideline maybe weren't as in it as they should have been. And yes, I understand it's hard to get in it when the atmosphere is this way, but it's something that you have to do in order to bounce back. And just, kind of an off day, it felt like, for this team.
Yeah, and to bring up Jalen, such an interesting performance, because I don't think he looked like the Jalen Daniels that you saw early in the season. Didn't run the ball, right? I think there were 2 times when he ran the ball, and I just overall didn't look like himself. I think there were positive moments. There's a couple throws to Quentin Skinner that looked really good. Obviously, the throw to Mason Fairchild.
Definitely.
There were moments that you saw some of the, I guess, vintage, if you will. It's crazy to say about a guy that, is still a junior, has 2 years of eligibility left. But I just think overall now you're looking at this saying, okay, Jalen Daniels is going to be the guy against Kansas State next week. Does this performance here today put him in a position where against Kansas State he's able to have a better performance? I think that's the ideal hope, but listening to Lance talk post-game, it sounds like it's going to be another day-to-day thing this week. The shoulder depends on the day, and there are days when it's good, there are days when it's bad, and today was a good day in terms of what it feels like. So it'll be interesting to see what it's like this next week, because if it flares up, all of a sudden it's back to, okay, is it Jason Bean? Is he healthy enough to play? Obviously he was good enough to go today a little bit, but the quarterback situation, it's crazy that you kind of gotten here where it's like, okay, Jalen doesn't look like he's 100%. Jason Bean clearly isn't 100%. And then you've got a true freshman who played 8 snaps the other week that you maybe have to rely on. So I think for Jalen, didn't look like he usually did. I think that positive enough that you can say, okay, maybe there's steps forward he takes next week, but still more questions are going to come over the next 6 days.
No, definitely. And I think one of the main questions there is, what do you do? If you don't have Bean and then you don't have Daniels, then you are, like you said, relying on a true freshman. And I don't think that Jalen's performance, like you mentioned, looked like typical Jalen. But Leipold did say post-game, the guy's been out for a month plus. This is his first time back in a real-time situation, real game, scenario. So, obviously he might look a little bit rusty. And we had the one pick, but that was his one turnover the whole game. And so his stat line didn't look terrible, but that I don't think that the stat line was necessarily representative of what we watched from, the viewer perspective. It just didn't look like typical Jalen Daniels. And now I don't think that Jason Bean obviously is not a bad option. The guy's had, over 200 plus yards, multiple touchdowns in each of the 4 games that he started for KU in place of Daniels. But at the same time, if he's not healthy, that's not a guy that you can have come out and ready to go, right? So it's just a very interesting situation, I think, there as well. And I don't think that we're going to know what the definitive answer is until this time next week. So it's going to be an interesting one. But I guess moving on to this K-State here before we wrap it up, what do you think is going to need to happen between now and Saturday when KU travels to Manhattan? What's one thing that sticks out to you that you're like, all right, this is what needs to happen in practice, this is what needs to be talked about? What do you think?
The intensity, I think, needs to be there. It's funny, Sam Burke talked post-game. He's not the type of guy that's going to call teammates out or say bad things about teammates, and yet he was talking about how practice this week, there wasn't the intensity level that maybe there was earlier in the season. And I think going against a K-State team that is physical, that has Deuce Vaughn, if Bijan Robinson is the best running back in the Big 12, I think Deuce Vaughn is the second best running back in the Big 12, and that team is going to be physical and run the ball, and that has to change, or else it's going to be a very similar result next week. Don't want to be grim about it, but it's not going to be pretty if Kansas does not improve physically up front, tackling. Every part of the defense will have to be better if they want to have a chance at winning in Manhattan next week.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, like you said, Deuce Vaughn is going to be that X factor. We've watched Kansas struggle against the run a little bit here, over the course of the season. They struggled against Baylor as well. But, today, Bijan Robinson's performance was exceptional. However, I think you could expect something similar from Deuce Vaughn as well. So that's going to be an interesting one for me. And I think eyes are on that and just kind of trying to claw back some of that momentum. You know, they came out flat today, and so just trying to work that up in the locker room. I mean, energy is a large part of it, is coming out prep to play. So energy plays a big factor. But that's about all we've got for you guys. It is very cold out here at the booth, so we are going to sign off. But this is Caroline and Michael with Kansas 247.